Sarah Martinez had always been told to follow the rules. As a radar technician aboard the USS Constellation, she knew her place in the chain of command. Her job was simple: monitor the screens, report what she saw, and never interfere with combat operations. The officers made the decisions. She just watched the dots move across her green display. That October morning in the Persian Gulf started like any other. The sun barely peeked over the horizon as Sarah settled into her station in the ship's Combat Information Center. The room hummed with quiet efficiency, filled with glowing screens and the soft chatter of radio communications. She adjusted her headset and began her routine checks of the radar systems. Sarah had been working radar for 3 years now. She knew every beep, every signal, every pattern that appeared on her screen. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she never imagined she would end up on a Navy destroyer in the middle of the ocean. Her father had been a mechanic, her mother a teacher. They had saved every penny to send her to technical school, proud that their daughter would have a better life than they did. The military had given Sarah structure and purpose. She excelled at understanding complex electronic systems, and her supervisors often praised her attention to detail, but they also reminded her constantly about staying in her lane. Junior enlisted personnel were not supposed to question orders or make tactical decisions. That was for the officers who had years of training and experience. On this particular morning, tensions were running high in the region. Intelligence reports suggested that hostile forces might attempt to disrupt shipping lanes. The Constellation and several other ships were patrolling the area, ready to respond to any threats. Sarah had been briefed about the possibility of action, but she tried not to think about it too much. Her job was to watch the radar, not worry about politics or strategy. As the morning progressed, the radar screen showed the usual traffic. Commercial ships moved slowly along established shipping routes. A few fishing boats dotted the waters closer to shore. Everything appeared normal and peaceful. Sarah made her routine reports to the watch officer, noting the positions and movements of various vessels. Around 10:30, something caught her attention. A new contact appeared on her screen, moving faster than the commercial traffic. She watched it for several minutes, tracking its course and speed. The contact seemed to be approaching their patrol area from the northeast. Could be another military vessel or perhaps a fast cargo ship. Sarah made a note in her log and continued monitoring. The contact maintained its course, but something about its movement pattern bothered her. Sarah had seen thousands of ships on her radar over the years. Each type of vessel had its own signature, its own way of moving through the water. This contact moved differently than she expected. It would speed up, then slow down, then change course slightly before returning to its original heading. Sarah checked her equipment to make sure everything was functioning properly. All systems showed green. The radar was working perfectly, and the contact was definitely real. She zoomed in on the area to get a better look at the movement pattern. The vessel was still about 40 miles away, but it seemed to be heading directly toward their position. She considered reporting the unusual behavior to the watch officer. But what would she say? That a ship was moving strangely? That didn't seem like enough to warrant bothering the lieutenant. Maybe the vessel was just having engine problems or the captain was avoiding some debris in the water. There could be many innocent explanations for the erratic movement. As Sarah continued watching, more contacts appeared on her screen. 2 additional vessels emerged from the same general area as the first contact. They moved in a loose formation, maintaining roughly the same course and speed. Now she had 3 fast-moving vessels approaching their patrol area. That seemed more significant than one ship with engine trouble. The 3 contacts continued their approach. Sarah estimated they would reach the outer edge of the patrol area within the next hour, if they maintained their current speed. She decided to inform the watch officer about the developing situation. Lieutenant Johnson was a fair man who always listened to his radar operators. He would know what to make of the situation. Sarah pressed her communication button and called for the lieutenant. When he arrived at her station, she pointed to the 3 contacts on her screen. She explained their course, speed, and unusual movement patterns. Lieutenant Johnson studied the display carefully, asking several questions about when the contacts first appeared and how their behavior had changed over time. The lieutenant thanked Sarah for the report and said he would pass the information up the chain of command. He returned to his station and began making phone calls to other officers on the ship. Sarah felt satisfied that she had done her job properly. She had identified a potentially important development and reported it to her superior. Now it was out of her hands. But as she continued monitoring the radar, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach tighten with worry. The 3 contacts had changed formation. Instead of moving in a loose group, they had spread out into a line. They were still approaching the patrol area, but now they were positioned to attack from multiple angles if that was their intention. Sarah had studied naval tactics in her training. She knew that hostile forces often used coordinated attacks to overwhelm defenses. The formation she was seeing on her radar looked very much like an attack pattern, but she had already reported the contacts to Lieutenant Johnson. Surely the officers were aware of the tactical implications and were taking appropriate action. Minutes passed slowly as Sarah watched the 3 contacts continue their approach. She could see other ships in the patrol group beginning to change their position slightly. The USS Constellation altered course by a few degrees, and radio chatter increased noticeably throughout the Combat Information Center. It seemed that the officers were indeed taking the situation seriously. As the 3 unknown vessels drew closer, Sarah began to pick up additional details on her radar. The contacts were definitely military-sized vessels, too large to be fishing boats or pleasure craft. Their speed and maneuverability suggested they were warships of some kind. Whether they belonged to a friendly or hostile nation remained unclear, but their behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious. Sarah checked the time and noted that the vessels would reach weapons range within the next 20 minutes if they maintained their current course and speed. She had done everything she was supposed to do. She had reported the contacts, provided detailed information about their movements, and continued monitoring the situation. Now she could only watch and wait to see what would happen next. The tension in the Combat Information Center was becoming palpable. Officers moved between stations with increasing urgency, and radio communications grew more frequent and intense. Sarah realized that what had started as a routine patrol was about to become something much more serious. She gripped her chair and prepared herself for whatever was coming. The 3 contacts continued their steady approach toward the patrol area. Sarah's radar screen showed them now only 30 miles away, moving at 28 knots. At this speed, they would reach the outer perimeter in less than an hour. The Combat Information Center buzzed with increased activity as officers hurried between stations, their voices tense but controlled. Captain Williams arrived in the center, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the room. Sarah had only seen the captain a few times during her service aboard the Constellation. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His reputation for calm leadership under pressure was well known throughout the ship. The captain approached Sarah's station, flanked by Lieutenant Johnson and the ship's tactical officer, Commander Brooks. Sarah felt nervous as the senior officers gathered around her radar display. She had never been the center of attention from such high-ranking personnel before. Her hands trembled slightly as she pointed out the 3 approaching contacts on her screen. Captain Williams studied the display intently, asking Sarah specific questions about the vessel's movements over the past hour. He wanted to know about course changes, speed variations, and any communication attempts. Sarah answered as precisely as possible. Referencing her detailed logs, she had documented everything carefully, just as she had been trained to do. Commander Brooks pulled up additional information on a nearby terminal. Intelligence reports indicated that hostile naval forces had been operating in the region, but their exact locations remained unknown. The 3 approaching vessels matched the general description of ships that had been causing problems for commercial shipping over the past several weeks. The captain ordered the ship to general quarters. Alarm bells rang throughout the Constellation as crew members rushed to their battle stations. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the reality of the situation became clear. This was not a drill or a routine encounter. The ship was preparing for potential combat. As the crew prepared for action, Sarah continued monitoring her radar. The 3 contacts maintained their course toward the patrol area, showing no signs of changing direction or slowing down. Radio operators attempted to establish communication with the approaching vessels, but received no response. The silence was ominous and suggested hostile intentions. 20 minutes later, additional contacts appeared on Sarah's radar screen. These new vessels emerged from behind a small island about 50 miles to the east. Sarah counted 4 more ships moving at high speed toward the same general area. Now there were 7 unknown vessels converging on the patrol zone from 2 different directions. Sarah immediately reported the new contacts to Commander Brooks, who was now coordinating the tactical response from her station. The commander's face grew grim as he studied the updated radar picture. 7 hostile vessels represented a significant threat to the 3-ship patrol group. The Constellation and her companions were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly over the next few minutes. The 7 approaching vessels formed into 2 distinct groups, positioning themselves to attack the patrol group from multiple angles. Sarah watched the radar display with growing concern as the hostile formation took shape. She had studied enough naval tactics to recognize a coordinated assault pattern. Captain Williams ordered the patrol group to take defensive positions. The 3 American ships moved into a triangular formation that would allow them to provide mutual support while maintaining maximum firepower in all directions. Sarah could feel the Constellation changing course as the helmsman responded to the captain's orders radio. Communications increased dramatically as the American ships coordinated their defensive preparations. Sarah heard weapons officers reporting the status of missile systems and gun mounts. Engineering personnel confirmed that all systems were operating at maximum efficiency. The ship was ready for battle. The first group of hostile vessels reached 30,000 yards from the patrol group. This put them within range of long-range missiles, and Sarah knew that combat could begin at any moment. She watched her radar screen intently, looking for any signs that the approaching ships were preparing to launch weapons. Suddenly, her radar detector equipment began picking up electronic signals from the hostile vessels. Sarah recognized the distinctive signature of fire control radar. The enemy ships were actively scanning the American patrol group, gathering targeting information for their weapon systems. This was the final step before launching an attack. Sarah reported the fire control radar immediately. Commander Brooks nodded grimly and passed the information to Captain Williams. The captain's voice came over the ship's communication system, informing the crew that hostile vessels had achieved weapons lock and that engagement was imminent. The tension in the Combat Information Center reached its peak as everyone waited for the first shots to be fired. Sarah gripped her console and tried to steady her breathing. She had trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of facing enemy fire. Her job was to continue monitoring the radar and providing information to the tactical team. At 28,000 yards, the lead hostile vessel launched its first missile. Sarah saw the small, fast-moving contact appear on her radar screen, accelerating rapidly toward the patrol group. She announced the missile launch immediately, her voice somehow remaining steady despite her fear. Within seconds, defensive systems aboard all 3 American ships sprang into action. Close-in weapon systems activated automatically, searching for incoming threats. Electronic warfare equipment began jamming enemy radar signals. The air filled with the sound of machinery and alarms as the ships fought for survival. Sarah watched as more missiles appeared on her radar screen. The hostile vessels were launching a coordinated attack, timing their shots to overwhelm the American defenses. She counted 6 incoming missiles in the first wave, with more launches following every few seconds. The Constellation's defensive systems engaged the incoming missiles. Sarah could hear the rapid-fire guns shooting down threats that came too close to the ship. Explosions echoed across the water as missiles were destroyed before reaching their targets. But some missiles got through the defensive screen. The first hit came against the USS Yorktown, the Constellation's sister ship positioned 2 miles to the north. Sarah saw the explosion on her radar as the missile found its target. Radio communications immediately filled with damage reports and calls for assistance. The Yorktown had been hit but remained in the fight. More missiles continued to streak toward the American ships. Sarah realized that the defensive systems were being overwhelmed by the sheer number of incoming weapons. The enemy had planned this attack carefully, using superior numbers to overcome American technological advantages. As she watched the battle unfold on her radar screen, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The hostile vessels were repositioning themselves to launch a second wave of missiles, but this time they were using a different approach pattern that would make the American defensive systems less effective. Sarah saw that the enemy ships were spreading out to attack from 6 different directions simultaneously. This would force the American ships to divide their defensive fire, making it easier for missiles to penetrate their defenses. It was a brilliant tactical move that could decide the outcome of the battle. She looked around the Combat Information Center and realized that the officers were focused on defending against the current missile attack. They had not yet noticed the enemy repositioning for the second wave. Sarah faced a critical decision. She was supposed to just monitor the radar and report what she saw, but she could see a tactical development that might save lives if acted upon quickly. The rules said she should report to Lieutenant Johnson, who would pass the information up the chain of command. But there might not be time for that process. The enemy ships would be in position to launch their devastating second attack within minutes. Sarah had to decide whether to break protocol and speak directly to the tactical officers. Sarah stared at her radar screen, watching the enemy ships move into their devastating attack formation. Every instinct told her to speak up immediately, but 3 years of military training held her back. She was just a petty officer second class. Commander Brooks and the other tactical officers had years of experience and access to information she didn't have. Maybe they already knew about the repositioning and had a plan to deal with it. But as the seconds ticked by, Sarah realized that the officers were completely focused on the current missile attack. Captain Williams was coordinating defensive fire with the other ships in the patrol group. Commander Brooks was managing the Constellation's weapon systems. Lieutenant Johnson was handling damage control communications. Nobody was paying attention to the enemy's movements for the next attack. The hostile vessels continued spreading out into their 6-point attack formation. Sarah calculated that they would be in optimal position within 4 minutes. Once they achieved that formation, they could launch missiles from all directions simultaneously. The American ships would not be able to defend against such an attack effectively. Sarah tried to catch Lieutenant Johnson's attention, but he was busy coordinating with the engineering department about potential damage from near-miss explosions. She waved at him frantically, but he didn't notice. The lieutenant was completely absorbed in his duties and couldn't see her urgent signals. Another wave of enemy missiles appeared on Sarah's radar screen. The hostile ships were maintaining their current attack while simultaneously moving into position for the devastating follow-up strike. Sarah counted 8 new missiles incoming, plus the repositioning of the enemy fleet. The situation was becoming overwhelming. The Constellation's defensive systems engaged the new wave of missiles. Sarah could hear the close-in weapons systems firing continuously, their rapid-fire guns creating a steady thunder throughout the ship. Explosions lit up the sky as missiles were intercepted, but the defensive systems were being pushed to their limits. Sarah looked at her radar display again and saw that the enemy ships were now 3 minutes away from achieving their optimal attack formation. If they succeeded in launching from 6 different directions, the result would be catastrophic. The American patrol group would face dozens of missiles coming from all angles, making effective defense nearly impossible. She made a desperate decision. Breaking all protocol, Sarah stood up from her station and walked directly to Commander Brooks. The tactical officer was hunched over his console, coordinating the ship's missile defenses. Sarah approached him from behind, her heart pounding with anxiety about violating the chain of command. "Commander Brooks, sir," Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the noise of battle. The commander didn't hear her over the sounds of defensive fire and radio communications. Sarah spoke louder, finally getting his attention. "Sir, I need to report something critical about enemy movements." Commander Brooks turned around, his face showing surprise and irritation at being interrupted by a junior enlisted person. "Petty Officer Martinez, you need to report through Lieutenant Johnson. I don't have time for individual radar reports right now." Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment, but she pressed on. "Sir, the enemy ships are repositioning for a 6-point attack. They'll be in formation in less than 3 minutes. If they launch from those positions, our defensive systems won't be able to handle it." The commander paused, his irritation replaced by interest. He followed Sarah back to her radar station and studied the display. His eyes widened as he saw the enemy formation taking shape. The hostile vessels were indeed moving into a coordinated attack pattern that would overwhelm the American defenses. "Jesus," Commander Brooks muttered under his breath. He immediately called Captain Williams over to look at Sarah's radar screen. The captain arrived within seconds, his face grim as he studied the tactical situation. Captain Williams understood the implications immediately. "How long until they reach optimal position?" he asked Sarah. 2 minutes and 30 seconds, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steadier now that the officers were taking her seriously. The captain grabbed his communication device and began issuing rapid orders to the other ships in the patrol group. "All units, this is Constellation Actual. Enemy vessels are repositioning for coordinated attack from multiple vectors. Recommend immediate evasive maneuvers and concentrated fire on lead enemy units. The American ships began changing course immediately, breaking out of their defensive formation to disrupt the enemy's attack plan. The USS Yorktown, despite damage from the earlier missile hit, increased speed and altered heading to the southeast. The USS Princeton moved northwest, creating a more dispersed formation that would be harder for the enemy to target effectively. Sarah watched her radar screen as the American ship's movements forced the enemy to adjust their own positioning. The hostile vessels could no longer achieve their perfect six-point attack formation because the targets were no longer in the expected locations. The enemy's carefully planned assault was being disrupted, but the hostile ships adapted quickly to the changing situation. Instead of trying to maintain their original formation, they split into two groups and began pursuing the American vessels. The battle was becoming a high-speed chase across the open ocean. Commander Brooks returned to Sarah's station to monitor the enemy movements. "Good catch, Martinez," he said quietly. "That formation would have been devastating if we hadn't seen it coming." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and relief. She had broken protocol by approaching the commander directly, but her action had potentially saved lives. The enemy's coordinated attack had been disrupted, giving the American ships a better chance of survival. The battle continued to evolve rapidly. The hostile vessels launched more missiles, but now they were firing from less optimal positions. The American defensive systems had a better chance of intercepting the incoming weapons. Sarah watched as missile after missile was shot down before reaching its target. The USS Princeton scored the first hit against an enemy vessel. Sarah saw the explosion on her radar as the hostile ship took damage and began slowing down. The Princeton's missile had found its mark, proving that the American ships could fight back effectively despite being outnumbered. Encouraged by the success, Captain Williams ordered a more aggressive response. The Constellation launched its own missiles at the nearest enemy ships. Sarah tracked the American weapons as they streaked toward their targets at high speed. 2 hits were scored against different hostile vessels. The tide of battle began to turn as the American ships gained confidence and coordination. The enemy's initial advantage from superior numbers was being offset by better training and more advanced defensive systems. Sarah realized that her intervention had given the patrol group the crucial time needed to organize an effective response. But the enemy was not finished. The hostile vessels regrouped and prepared for another coordinated attack. This time they approached from the east and west simultaneously, trying to divide the American defensive fire. Sarah watched the movement on her radar and immediately reported it to Commander Brooks. The commander nodded and passed the information to Captain Williams. The American ships adjusted their formation again, positioning themselves to meet the two-pronged attack. Sarah marveled at how quickly the officers could process tactical information and respond with appropriate countermeasures. More missiles filled the air as both sides escalated the engagement. Sarah's radar screen showed dozens of contacts moving at high speed in all directions. The battle had become a complex three-dimensional chess match, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other. The Constellation shuddered as a near-miss explosion sent shockwaves through the hull. Sarah gripped her console to maintain her balance as debris from the blast scattered across the water nearby. The enemy was getting closer to scoring direct hits despite the ship's defensive systems. Sarah noticed that one group of enemy vessels was trying to position itself behind a small island, where they would be hidden from radar until the last moment. This was another tactical threat that needed immediate attention. She had already broken protocol once today, and now she faced the same decision again. Looking around the Combat Information Center, Sarah saw that all the officers were busy managing the current engagement. Nobody else had noticed the enemy ships moving toward the concealed position. If she waited for the proper chain of command, the warning might come too late to be effective. Sarah took a deep breath and made her second crucial decision of the day. She walked directly to Captain Williams, who was coordinating the overall battle from the command center. Breaking protocol again, she interrupted the captain to report the new threat developing behind the island. Captain Williams was in the middle of coordinating a missile strike when Sarah approached him. The captain held up his hand, signaling for her to wait while he finished his radio communication with the USS Princeton. Sarah stood there, watching her radar mentally as she knew the enemy ships were moving closer to their concealed position behind the island. "Captain, sir," Sarah said, as soon as he finished his transmission. "I'm tracking 2 enemy vessels moving behind Kura Island. They'll be hidden from our primary radar in about 90 seconds. Captain Williams looked at Sarah with surprise. It was highly unusual for a junior enlisted person to interrupt him during combat operations, but something in her voice and expression told him this was important. He followed her back to the radar station to see what she had discovered. The radar display clearly showed 2 enemy ships moving toward the backside of the small island. Once they reached that position, they would be hidden from the patrol group's radar systems until they emerged on the other side. They could then launch a surprise attack from an unexpected direction. "How long until they're completely hidden?" the captain asked. 60 seconds, sir," Sarah replied, checking her calculations. "They'll be able to move around the island and attack us from the northwest while we're focused on the main enemy force." Captain Williams immediately understood the tactical implications. The enemy was trying to divide his attention and create multiple threats simultaneously. If successful, this maneuver would force him to split his defensive resources and make his ships more vulnerable to all attacks. The captain grabbed his radio and contacted the USS Princeton. "Princeton, this is Constellation Actual. We have 2 enemy contacts moving to concealed position behind Kura Island. Recommend you adjust course to maintain radar coverage of that area." The Princeton's captain acknowledged the order and began turning his ship to maintain sight lines around the island. This prevented the enemy vessels from achieving complete concealment, but it also forced the Princeton to move away from the main battle area. Sarah watched the tactical situation develop on her radar screen. The enemy's plan was working partially. While they couldn't achieve complete surprise, they had succeeded in forcing the American ships to divide their forces. The battle was becoming more complex and difficult to manage. More missiles appeared on Sarah's radar as the main enemy force pressed their attack. The Constellation's defensive systems engaged the incoming weapons, but Sarah could tell the systems were being pushed to their limits. The constant firing was generating enormous heat, and she could smell the acrid smoke from overworked electronics. Commander Brooks returned to Sarah's station to coordinate with her radar information. "Martinez, I need you to focus on tracking all missile launches. Don't worry about ship movements right now. Just call out every missile as soon as you see it." Sarah adjusted her radar settings to optimize for missile detection. The incoming weapons appeared as small, fast-moving dots on her screen. Each one represented a potentially deadly threat to her ship and her shipmates. She began calling out launches as quickly as she could identify them. "Missile launch, bearing 045, range 22,000 yards, Sarah announced. "Second missile, same bearing, following close behind." The defensive systems responded to her calls, swiveling to engage the incoming threats. Sarah watched as the ship's close-in weapon systems locked onto the missiles and began firing. The rapid-fire guns created a wall of metal in the air, designed to destroy incoming weapons before they could reach the ship. 2 direct hits lit up the sky as the defensive guns found their targets. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction, knowing that her quick reporting had helped save the ship. But more missiles were already appearing on her radar screen, and the battle was far from over. The enemy ships behind the island finally emerged from concealment, just as Sarah had predicted. They immediately launched missiles at the USS Princeton, which was now separated from the main patrol group. Sarah watched with horror as 4 missiles streaked toward the Princeton from an unexpected direction. The Princeton's defensive systems were focused on threats from the main enemy force. The surprise attack from behind the island caught them partially unprepared. Sarah saw 2 of the 4 missiles penetrate the Princeton's defenses and strike the ship. "Princeton's been hit," Commander Brooks shouted into his radio. "Multiple impacts, unknown damage." The Princeton immediately began transmitting damage reports. The ship had taken serious hits but remained operational. However, her defensive capabilities were reduced, making her more vulnerable to follow-up attacks. The enemy's tactical maneuver had succeeded in damaging one of the American ships. Captain Williams ordered the Constellation to move closer to the Princeton to provide additional defensive coverage. This meant abandoning their optimal position for engaging the main enemy force, but protecting the damaged ship took priority. Sarah watched the tactical picture change as American ships repositioned. The enemy seemed to sense weakness and press their attack more aggressively. More missiles filled the air as hostile ships moved closer to the American patrol group. Sarah's radar screen became cluttered with incoming threats from multiple directions. She struggled to call out each launch quickly enough for the defensive systems to respond. "Multiple launches from the northeast," Sarah announced. "I count 6 missiles inbound, range 18,000 yards. The Constellation's weapon system swiveled to meet this new threat while continuing to defend against missiles from other directions." Sarah could hear the defensive guns firing continuously, their ammunition expenditure becoming a serious concern. The ship carried a large supply of defensive rounds, but not an unlimited amount. A massive explosion rocked the ship as a missile detonated close enough to cause damage. Sarah was thrown against her console as the blast wave passed through the hull. Emergency lights activated as the main power fluctuated. The acrid smell of smoke and burning electronics filled the Combat Information Center. "Damage control teams to sections 3 and 4, came the announcement over the ship's communication system. The Constellation had been hit, but Sarah could tell from the continued operation of her equipment that the damage was not critical. The ship remained in the fight. Sarah checked her radar and saw that the enemy was preparing for another coordinated attack. The hostile ships were moving into a new formation, apparently trying to overwhelm the American defenses through sheer volume of missiles. She counted 7 enemy vessels still operational and capable of launching weapons. "Commander Brooks," Sarah called out. "The enemy ships are forming up for another mass attack. They're positioning for maximum saturation fire." The commander studied Sarah's radar display and nodded grimly. The enemy was indeed preparing to launch everything they had in one final overwhelming assault. If successful, this attack could finish off the damaged American ships. Captain Williams received the information and made a critical decision. Instead of waiting for the enemy attack, he ordered an immediate offensive strike using the Constellation's remaining long-range missiles. The ship would attack the enemy formation before they could launch their coordinated assault. Sarah watched as the Constellation's missiles streaked toward the enemy ships. The American weapons moved at incredible speed, covering the distance to their targets in less than 2 minutes. She tracked each missile carefully, hoping they would disrupt the enemy formation before the coordinated attack could begin. The first American missile struck an enemy ship directly, causing a massive explosion that lit up the radar screen. The hostile vessel disappeared from Sarah's display, eliminated from the battle. A second hit followed moments later, taking out another enemy ship. The enemy formation began to break apart as the remaining ships took evasive action. Their carefully planned coordinated attack was disrupted as they scrambled to avoid more American missiles. Sarah realized that Captain Williams had turned the tables on the enemy by striking first, but the battle was not over. The surviving enemy ships regrouped and began a desperate final attack. Sarah could see on her radar that they were launching everything they had, determined to inflict maximum damage before being destroyed themselves. The air filled with more missiles than she had seen at any point during the engagement. Sarah began calling out the incoming threats as fast as she could speak. Massive launch from multiple bearings. 12 No-14 missiles inbound from all directions. This was the moment that would determine the outcome of the battle. If the American ships could survive this final assault, they would emerge victorious. But if the enemy missiles penetrated their defenses, the result could be catastrophic. The 14 incoming missiles created the most dangerous moment of the entire battle. Sarah watched her radar screen with intense focus, tracking each weapon as it approached the American ships. The missiles were coming from 6 different directions, making it nearly impossible for the defensive systems to engage all of them effectively. The Constellation's close-in weapon systems activated automatically, their radar-guided guns swiveling to track the nearest threats. The sound of rapid-fire cannons filled the air as the defensive systems began engaging missiles at maximum range. Sarah could see tracers streaking across the sky like deadly fireworks. Commander Brooks coordinated the defensive effort from his station, prioritizing targets based on their proximity and threat level. The most dangerous missiles were those approaching from directly ahead, as they would have the least time to be intercepted before impact. Sarah continued calling out new threats as they appeared on her radar. 2 missiles bearing 090, very close, Sarah announced. "Range dropping fast!" The starboard defensive guns swung toward the new threat, their barrels glowing red-hot from continuous firing. Sarah watched on her radar as the guns tracked the incoming missiles, waiting for the moment when they would be close enough for accurate engagement. Every second counted in this deadly race. The first missile was destroyed at 800 yards, exploding in a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded the optical sensors. The second missile continued its approach, somehow avoiding the defensive fire. Sarah realized it was going to hit the ship unless something stopped it in the next few seconds. At the last possible moment, the port side defensive system acquired the missile and fired a short burst. The weapon disintegrated just 200 yards from the ship, close enough that debris scattered across the deck. Sarah felt the concussion from the explosion through the hull of the ship. More missiles continued to approach from other directions. The USS Princeton, despite her earlier damage, was fighting desperately to defend herself against 4 incoming weapons. Sarah could see on her radar that the Princeton's defensive systems were not operating at full capacity due to battle damage. One of the Princeton's missiles penetrated her defenses and struck the ship near the superstructure. Sarah saw the explosion on her radar and heard the immediate damage reports over the radio. The Princeton was taking serious punishment but continued to fight. The USS Yorktown was facing her own crisis with 3 missiles approaching from the northeast. The ship's defensive systems engaged all 3 weapons simultaneously, creating a spectacular display of firepower. 2 missiles were destroyed, but the third continued its deadly approach. Sarah watched helplessly as the missile struck the Yorktown amidships. The explosion was visible on her radar as a bright flash, followed by secondary explosions as the weapon's impact triggered fires aboard the ship. The Yorktown's captain immediately began reporting casualties and requesting assistance. The Constellation was still facing 4 incoming missiles from different directions. Sarah tracked each weapon carefully, providing updates to Commander Brooks as the defensive systems engaged them one by one. The ship's guns were firing continuously now, their barrels so hot they were beginning to warp from the extreme temperatures. 3 missiles destroyed, Sarah reported, 1 still incoming from bearing 270 range 600 yards. This final missile was approaching from an angle that made it difficult for the defensive systems to track. The weapon was flying low over the water, using the ocean surface to mask its approach from radar. Sarah realized that this missile might succeed where all the others had failed. The portside defensive guns detected the missile at the last moment and began firing. Sarah held her breath as she watched the tracers reach out toward the incoming weapon. The missile continued its approach, apparently undamaged by the defensive fire. At 300 yards, the missile finally took a hit from the defensive guns, but instead of being destroyed completely, it was only damaged. The weapon continued toward the ship, though its guidance system was clearly malfunctioning. It was no longer flying straight and true. The damaged missile struck the ocean just 50 yards from the Constellation's hull. The underwater explosion sent a massive shock wave through the water, lifting the ship and slamming it back down. Sarah was thrown against her console as the blast wave hit, but she managed to maintain her grip on the radar controls. Emergency alarms began sounding throughout the ship as damage control teams assessed the effects of the near-miss explosion. Sarah could hear water rushing into compartments below the waterline, indicating that the ship's hull had been damaged by the blast. The Constellation was taking on water but remained operational. The immediate missile threat was over, but Sarah could see on her radar that several enemy ships were still active and preparing for another attack. The battle had taken a heavy toll on both sides, but it was not finished yet. She quickly assessed the tactical situation to determine what threats remained. 3 enemy ships were still operational, though Sarah could see that at least one of them was moving more slowly than before, suggesting battle damage. The American patrol group had survived the massive missile attack, but all 3 ships had taken varying degrees of damage. The question now was whether they could continue fighting effectively. Captain Williams ordered damage control teams to prioritize keeping the ship's weapons and radar systems operational. The Constellation's primary mission was to protect shipping in the area, and that required maintaining combat capability despite the damage. Sarah's radar was still functioning normally, providing crucial tactical information. The 3 surviving enemy ships began to regroup for another attack. Sarah watched their movements carefully, looking for any indication of their next tactical move. The enemy had lost more than half their force, but they still outnumbered the American patrol group and showed no signs of retreating. Enemy ships forming up again, Sarah reported to Commander Brooks. They're moving into attack formation bearing 040. The commander studied the radar display and nodded. The enemy was positioning for another coordinated strike, probably using their remaining missiles in a final desperate attack. Both sides were running low on ammunition and taking serious damage. The next exchange might determine the outcome of the battle. Captain Williams made a crucial decision. Instead of waiting for the enemy to attack again, he ordered all 3 American ships to launch their remaining long-range missiles simultaneously. This would be an all-or-nothing offensive strike designed to eliminate the enemy before they could organize another assault. Sarah watched as missiles from all 3 American ships streaked toward the enemy formation. The weapons covered the distance quickly, their high speed giving the enemy ships little time to react. The first missile struck its target dead center, eliminating one of the 3 remaining enemy vessels. The second American missile missed its target as the enemy ship turned sharply to avoid impact. But the third missile, fired from the USS Princeton despite her battle damage, found its mark and scored another direct hit. 2 of the 3 enemy ships had been destroyed in the American counterattack. The lone surviving enemy vessel immediately began transmitting on international distress frequencies. The ship's captain was requesting permission to withdraw from the engagement, indicating that his vessel was severely damaged and no longer capable of effective combat. The battle was essentially over. Captain Williams granted the enemy ship permission to withdraw, provided they left the patrol area immediately and did not return. The hostile vessel turned away from the American formation and began limping toward international waters. Sarah tracked it on her radar until it disappeared over the horizon. The immediate threat was over, but the American ships faced serious challenges. All 3 vessels had taken battle damage and were operating with reduced capabilities. The USS Princeton was in particularly bad shape, with multiple hull breaches and significant casualties among her crew. Sarah continued monitoring her radar for any additional threats, while damage control teams worked throughout the ship. The Constellation had performed well in the engagement, but she would need extensive repairs before returning to full operational status. The crew had fought bravely and successfully defended their patrol area. As the adrenaline from combat began to fade, Sarah realized the magnitude of what had happened. She had broken military protocol twice during the battle, directly approaching senior officers instead of following the chain of command. Her actions had potentially saved lives and influenced the outcome of the engagement. Commander Brooks approached Sarah's station as the immediate crisis passed. His expression was serious, and Sarah wondered if she was about to be disciplined for her breach of protocol. Instead, the commander surprised her with his words. "Outstanding work today, Martinez," he said quietly. "Your tactical awareness and quick reporting were crucial to our success. You may have saved this ship and a lot of lives." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and pride. She had done her duty as she saw it, putting the safety of her shipmates above her own concerns about following regulations. The battle had tested everyone aboard the ship, and she had proven herself capable of rising to the challenge when it mattered most. The hours following the battle were filled with urgent activity, as all 3 ships worked to assess damage and treat casualties. Sarah remained at her radar station, monitoring the surrounding waters for any additional threats while damage control teams moved throughout the ship. The Constellation had taken serious hits, but her crew was determined to keep her operational. Medical teams from all 3 ships coordinated to treat the wounded. The USS Princeton had suffered the most casualties, with 17 sailors injured and 3 in critical condition. Helicopters were called in from the nearest base to evacuate the most seriously wounded personnel. Sarah watched the aircraft approach on her radar, grateful that help was arriving quickly. Captain Williams established communication with Fleet Headquarters to report the engagement and request additional support. The battle had demonstrated that hostile forces were operating in the area with sophisticated weapons and coordinated tactics. This was not a random encounter, but part of a larger strategic threat to shipping lanes. As the immediate crisis stabilized, Sarah found herself thinking about her actions during the battle. She had made split-second decisions that violated her training and military protocol. Breaking the chain of command was a serious offense that could result in disciplinary action or even court-martial. But she had seen threats that needed immediate attention. Lieutenant Johnson approached Sarah's station with a serious expression. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, wondering if this was the beginning of disciplinary proceedings. Instead, the lieutenant sat down beside her and spoke in a quiet, thoughtful voice. "Martinez, I want you to know that what you did today took real courage," he said. "You saw things that the rest of us missed, and you had the guts to speak up about it. That's not easy for someone in your position." Sarah looked at Lieutenant Johnson with surprise. She had expected criticism for breaking protocol, not praise for her actions. The lieutenant continued speaking, his voice reflecting the weight of the day's events. In combat, things happen fast and situations change constantly, he explained. Sometimes the formal chain of command can't keep up with tactical developments. You made judgment calls that help save lives, and that's what really matters. The lieutenant paused, looking out at the damaged ship around them. Repair teams were working frantically to patch holes and restore damaged systems. The battle had tested everyone aboard the Constellation, from the newest recruit to the most experienced officers. I'm recommending you for promotion and a commendation for your actions today, Lieutenant Johnson continued. You demonstrated exceptional situational awareness and tactical judgment under pressure. The Navy needs people who can think independently when lives are on the line. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the lieutenant's words. She had done what seemed necessary in the moment, not thinking about recognition or advancement. Her focus had been on protecting her ship and shipmates, nothing more. The idea that her actions might be officially recognized had never occurred to her. Over the next several hours, Sarah continued monitoring her radar while listening to damage reports from throughout the ship. The Constellation had taken significant punishment but remained seaworthy. Emergency repairs were stabilizing the most critical problems, though major work would be needed once they reached port. As evening approached, additional ships arrived to reinforce the patrol area. Sarah tracked 2 destroyers and a cruiser on her radar as they took positions around the damaged American vessels. The immediate tactical situation was now secure, with enough firepower present to deter any further enemy action. Captain Williams visited each department personally to thank the crew for their performance during the battle. When he reached Sarah's station, he stopped and studied her radar display with interest. The captain had been busy with command decisions during the engagement and wanted to understand exactly how the tactical picture had developed. Show me how you tracked the enemy movements, Captain Williams requested. Sarah walked him through the radar data, explaining how she had identified the various attack formations and repositioning maneuvers. The captain listened intently, asking detailed questions about timing and tactical implications. Your analysis was absolutely correct, the captain concluded. The enemy was using sophisticated tactics that could have overwhelmed our defenses. Your early warnings gave us the time we needed to respond effectively. The captain paused, looking directly at Sarah with an expression of respect and appreciation. I understand you broke protocol to report directly to Commander Brooks and myself. Under normal circumstances, that would be a serious breach of military discipline. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, wondering if disciplinary action was still coming despite the praise from other officers. She had known when she made those decisions that she was violating regulations. The consequences of her actions were still unclear. However, Captain Williams continued, these were not normal circumstances. You demonstrated exceptional judgment and tactical awareness that contributed directly to our success. I'm endorsing the lieutenant's recommendation for your promotion and commendation. The relief Sarah felt was overwhelming. She had been prepared to face punishment for her breach of protocol, but instead was being recognized for her contributions to the battle. The validation from her commanding officer meant more to her than any formal recognition could. As the ship continued its damage assessment, Sarah learned more about the casualties and injuries suffered during the engagement. The Princeton had lost 2 sailors and had 15 others seriously wounded. The Yorktown had suffered 8 casualties but no fatalities. The Constellation had been more fortunate, with only 5 injured crew members. Each casualty report reminded Sarah of the stakes involved in the day's battle. Real people had been hurt and killed in the fighting. Her radar screen had shown abstract dots moving across a green display, but those dots represented ships full of human beings fighting for their lives. The enemy losses had been much more severe. Intelligence reports indicated that 4 hostile ships had been sunk, and 3 others severely damaged. The enemy force had been effectively eliminated as a threat to shipping in the area, but Sarah took no satisfaction in the destruction, knowing that enemy sailors had also paid with their lives. Late that evening, Sarah was finally relieved from her watch station. She had been monitoring radar for more than 12 hours straight, through one of the most intense naval battles in recent memory. Her replacement was an experienced petty officer who had heard about her performance during the engagement. Hell of a job today, Martinez, the relief operator said as he took over the radar station. Word is you saw things that saved a lot of lives. Makes me proud to be in the same rate. Sarah thanked him and headed toward her quarters, exhausted but still processing the events of the day. The ship around her showed obvious signs of battle damage, with emergency lighting in some passages and repair crews still working on critical systems. But the Constellation was heading home, and that was what mattered most. In her small cabin, Sarah sat on her bunk and tried to understand what had happened to her. 24 hours earlier, she had been a junior radar technician following routine procedures and staying within her assigned duties. Now she was being recommended for promotion and commendation for tactical decisions that had influenced a major naval engagement. The experience had changed her understanding of her role in the military. She had always been taught to follow orders and stay within her area of responsibility, but the battle had shown her that sometimes situations demanded independent thinking and the courage to speak up when something important was at stake. Sarah realized that her instinctive decision to break protocol had not been reckless or insubordinate. It had been the result of training, experience, and a deep commitment to protecting her shipmates. When she saw threats developing that others had missed, she had acted on that knowledge despite the personal risk of violating regulations. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah thought about how the day's events would affect her future in the Navy. The commendation and promotion would open new opportunities for advancement and specialized training. But more importantly, she had proven to herself that she could perform under pressure and make critical decisions when lives depended on it. The battle had tested everyone aboard the ship, from the newest recruit to the most senior officers. Sarah had discovered capabilities within herself that she had never known existed. Her quick thinking and tactical awareness had made a real difference in the outcome of the engagement, saving lives and protecting her ship. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in her dress uniform aboard the USS Constellation, now docked at Naval Station Norfolk. The ship had undergone extensive repairs during their transit home, but evidence of the battle still remained in the form of new metal patches and replacement equipment throughout the vessel. The crew was assembled on the main deck for a formal ceremony, recognizing those who had distinguished themselves during the engagement. Sarah felt nervous as she waited with several other sailors who were receiving awards. She had never been the center of attention like this before, and the presence of senior Navy officials made the occasion even more intimidating. Admiral Richardson, the fleet commander, had flown in specifically for this ceremony. He was a distinguished officer with more than 30 years of service, including command of ships during several major conflicts. The Admiral's presence demonstrated the importance that Navy leadership placed on the battle and its outcome. Captain Williams called the ceremony to order and began reading the citation for Sarah's Navy Commendation Medal. The formal language described her exceptional tactical awareness and decisive action under enemy fire during the engagement. Sarah listened to the words with amazement, still hardly believing that her actions had led to this recognition. Petty Officer Martinez demonstrated remarkable initiative and professional competence when she identified enemy tactical movements that had been missed by senior personnel. Captain Williams read, "Her courage in breaking normal, reporting procedures to provide critical tactical intelligence directly contributed to the successful defense of the patrol group." The citation continued to describe how Sarah's warnings had enabled the American ships to disrupt enemy attack formations and ultimately prevail in the engagement. The formal language made her actions sound more heroic than she remembered them being. In the moment, she had simply done what seemed necessary to protect her shipmates. Admiral Richardson stepped forward to present Sarah with her medal and promotion warrant. She had been advanced to Petty Officer First Class, a significant jump that normally would have taken several more years to achieve. The promotion came with increased responsibilities and better pay, but more importantly, it represented recognition of her capabilities. "Petty Officer Martinez," the Admiral said as he pinned the medal to her uniform, "your actions during this engagement exemplify the best traditions of the United States Navy. You demonstrated that initiative and tactical thinking are not limited to officers, but can come from any sailor who has the courage to act when the situation demands it." The Admiral paused, looking directly at Sarah with an expression of genuine respect. "Your willingness to speak up when you saw developing threats, despite the personal risk of violating protocol, showed the kind of leadership that wins battles and saves lives. The Navy needs more sailors like you." After the formal presentation, Sarah was approached by several officers who wanted to discuss her experience during the battle. Commander Brooks, who had been present throughout the engagement, was particularly interested in her analysis of enemy tactics and how similar threats might be detected in the future. We're developing new training protocols based on what happened that day, Commander Brooks explained. Your insights about recognizing coordinated attack formations will be incorporated into radar operator training throughout the fleet. Other ships need to be prepared for the kind of sophisticated tactics we encountered. Sarah felt honored that her experience would be used to help train other sailors. The battle had been a learning experience for everyone involved, from junior enlisted personnel to senior officers. The enemy had used tactics and coordination that exceeded previous intelligence estimates, forcing the Navy to revise its defensive procedures. Lieutenant Johnson, who had become something of a mentor to Sarah, explained how the engagement had influenced broader Navy policy. Fleet Headquarters has issued new guidelines about encouraging tactical input from all crew members during combat operations, he said. Your experience proved that good. Ideas can come from anywhere on the ship. The new guidelines emphasize that junior personnel should not hesitate to report tactical observations directly to senior officers when time-critical situations developed. The formal chain of command remained important for routine operations, but combat situations required flexibility and rapid decision-making from everyone involved. Sarah learned that her story had become something of a legend throughout the fleet. Other young sailors were hearing about the radar operator who had saved her ship by speaking up when she saw threats that others had missed. The story was being used in leadership training to emphasize the importance of initiative and independent thinking. But Sarah was also aware that her experience had come at a significant cost. The battle had resulted in casualties on both sides, and families had lost loved ones in the fighting. Her radar screen had shown abstract tactical movements, but the reality was that real people had been hurt and killed in the engagement. The memorial service for the sailors who had died during the battle was held the following day. Sarah attended along with the rest of the crew, paying her respects to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. The ceremony reminded everyone that military service involved serious risks, and that every engagement could have tragic consequences. Among those honored was Petty Officer Second Class James Wilson from the USS Princeton, who had died when his ship was hit by enemy missiles. Sarah had never met Wilson personally, but she knew he had been a radar operator like herself. His death served as a sobering reminder of what could have happened to any of them during the battle. The weeks following, the ceremony brought new opportunities for Sarah. She was selected for advanced tactical training that would prepare her for leadership positions in radar and combat information centers. The Navy was investing in her education, recognizing her potential for greater responsibilities in the future. Sarah also received several offers to transfer to different ships and assignments. Some positions would have been prestigious postings that could accelerate her career advancement, but she chose to remain aboard the Constellation, feeling a strong bond with the ship and crew who had shared the battle experience with her. Captain Williams supported her decision to stay with the ship. The Constellation is lucky to have you, Martinez, he said during their meeting. You've proven that you can perform under pressure, and that's exactly the kind of person I want in my combat information center. The ship was scheduled for an extended deployment to the Pacific, where tensions were rising in several disputed areas. Sarah's experience and proven tactical abilities would be valuable assets during the deployment. She looked forward to the challenges and responsibilities that lay ahead. As Sarah reflected on everything that had happened since that morning when she first spotted enemy ships on her radar, she realized how much she had changed. The quiet young woman from Texas who had joined the Navy to get technical training had discovered leadership capabilities she never knew existed. The battle had taught her that following orders and staying within assigned duties were important but not always sufficient. Sometimes situations demanded independent thinking and the courage to act on tactical knowledge, even when it meant breaking normal procedures. The key was knowing when to take those risks and how to do it effectively. Sarah understood that her career would now be defined partly by that one day of combat. Other sailors would always know her as the radar operator, who had helped win a significant naval engagement. That reputation brought both opportunities and responsibilities that she was determined to fulfill. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that every person on a ship had the potential to make critical contributions during dangerous situations. Rank and position were important for organization and discipline, But tactical awareness and good judgment could come from anyone who had the training and courage to act on their knowledge. The USS Constellation sailed from Norfolk 3 months later, heading for her new deployment with a crew that had been tested in combat and proven themselves capable of facing any challenge. Sarah took her position in the Combat Information Center with confidence, knowing that she and her shipmates were ready for whatever dangers lay ahead. Her radar screen glowed with the familiar green light, displaying the endless ocean around their ship. But now Sarah looked at that display with the knowledge that dots on a screen represented real ships with real people, and that her ability to interpret those signals could mean the difference between life and death for everyone aboard. She was ready for that responsibility.